Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. I'm going to give you new details about what's happening in the country, important news clips designed to give you an update on where we are right now as a country, the evolution, if you will, of America from an infrastructure point of view and from a social justice point of view. Welcome to this channel everyone. My name is Dr. Chhoda. This channel is about the country, the economy as well as our money, and I can tell you that I do my best to cover the hard-hitting topics and tell you the truth wherever the truth might lead us. Let's start with the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell slamming the Biden infrastructure plan. He says it won't build back better, it'll build back never. Yep, that's what he said. Let's roll the tape and check out exactly what he said.
And the relative pittance this proposal does to allocate actual infrastructure would have to creep through a tangled environmental review process. Without serious permitting reform, Mr. President, it won't build back better. It'll build back never.
Now, what I find really interesting is that the two political parties continue to take shots at each other. How about working together? How about coming up with a constructive set of ideas as opposed to just slamming the other party? Politics is about timing, opportunity, tribalism, and perception. In yet another example of tribalism, Mitch McConnell says they've assembled a patchwork of left-wing social engineering programs and want to label it infrastructure. I want to know whether you agree or disagree. Let's roll the tape and hear from Mitch McConnell.
They've assembled a patchwork of left-wing social engineering programs and want to label it infrastructure.
And we all know about the historic verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, who was convicted of the murder of George Floyd. A pretty incredible turning point for our country. In fact, the federal government is now getting involved. If you've been following our channel, I did cover the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, and Derek Chauvin was convicted of the murder of George Floyd. A pretty unbelievable turning point in our country. Now the federal government is involved. The Attorney General Merrick Garland said this: the Justice Department has opened a civil investigation to determine whether the Minneapolis Police Department engaged in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing. Wow, let's roll the tape and hear from the Attorney General Merrick Garland.
Yesterday's verdict in the state criminal trial does not address potentially systemic policing issues in Minneapolis. Today, I am announcing that the Justice Department has opened a civil investigation to determine whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing. This effort will be staffed by experienced attorneys and other personnel from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota.
And folks, while all that is happening, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I think is absolutely cuckoo, I honestly think that there's something wrong with her. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene sent out this tweet. She said, DC is completely dead tonight. People staying in and were scared to go out because of the fear of riots. She's referring to the reaction, if you will, in DC to the verdict of the Derek Chauvin trial. And she wrote, police are everywhere and have riot gear. Black Lives Matter is the strongest terrorist threat in our country. Folks, I don't know what's wrong with this woman, but I'm here to report the news to you, and I can tell you that I think she's absolutely cuckoo. Here's a response from Jim Acosta at CNN saying, you should have tweeted this out on the 6th of January. Last night was fine. Basically saying everything was just fine in DC. Jake Sherman from Punchbowl News also chimed in and said this in response to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Complete nonsense. I live in DC and it was totally normal last night. People out walking around, eating dinner outside. Not sure what she's talking about. Well, Jake, neither am I. Let's get back to more normal people. The president did chime in on the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. He said the guilty verdict does not bring back George Floyd, but through the family's pain, they are finding purpose. So George's legacy will not be just about his death, but about what we must do in his memory. Let's roll the tape and hear President Biden addressing this subject, which could be a turning point in the history of our country.
The guilty verdict does not bring back George, but through the family's pain, they're finding purpose. So George's legacy will not be just about his death, but about what we must do in his memory. I also spoke to Gianna, George's young daughter, again. When I met her last year, I've said this before, at George's funeral, I told her how brave I thought she was. And I sort of knelt down to hold her hand. I said, Daddy's looking down on you. He's so proud. She said to me then, I'll never forget it, Daddy changed the world. And I told her this afternoon, Daddy did change the world. Let that be his legacy.
President Biden made some really important comments, and I think this is something that we should all pay attention to, because we all want our better angels to prevail. President Biden said this: we can and we must do more to reduce the likelihood that tragedies like this will never happen or occur again, to ensure that black and brown people or anyone don't fear interactions with law enforcement. Let's roll the tape and hear from President Biden.
In order to deliver real change and reform, we can and we must do more to reduce the likelihood that tragedies like this will ever happen and occur again. To ensure that black and brown people, or anyone, so they don't fear the interactions with law enforcement, that they don't have to wake up knowing that they can lose their very life in the course of just living their life. They don't have to worry about whether their sons or daughters will come home after a grocery store run, or just walking down the street, or driving their car, or playing in the park, or just sleeping at home. And this takes acknowledging and confronting head-on systemic racism and the racial disparities that exist in policing and in our criminal justice system more broadly. You know, state and local government and law enforcement needs to step up, but so does the federal government. That's why I've appointed the leadership of the Justice Department that I have, that is fully committed to restoring trust between law enforcement and the community they are sworn to serve and protect. I have complete confidence in the Attorney General, General Garland's leadership and commitment. I've also nominated two key Justice Department nominees, Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark, who are eminently qualified, highly respected lawyers who have spent their entire careers fighting to advance racial equity and justice. Vanita and Kristen have the experience and the skill necessary to advance our administration's priorities to root out unconstitutional policing and reform our criminal justice system.
Okay, so jumping from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we alluded to earlier, to another person who is a little bit bananas, Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican from Texas. Here's a tweet from The Hill. Cruz thinks that President Biden's comments on the Chauvin verdict are grounds for a mistrial. Here's the article on your screen from The Hill that actually outlined the story in more detail. As always, we'll provide you with a link in the description section below so you can check out the story for yourself and dig deeper if you want to. Also, Congresswoman Cori Bush, who's a Democrat from Missouri, weighed in on the aftermath of the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. She said there should not be any good cops and bad cops. Why is that a discussion? There should be cops, let that be that. She said we don't go in and say, oh, that's a good nurse, now that's a bad nurse. Pretty interesting. Let me know what you think. Let's roll the tape and hear from Congresswoman Cori Bush.
There should not be any good cops and bad cops. Why is that a discussion? There should be cops. I mean, if we're going to have cops, there should be cops. Let that be that. Yeah. We don't go in and say, oh, that's a good nurse. Now that's a bad nurse. Oh, that's a good pilot. Oh, that's a bad pilot. That's a good chef. That's a bad chef. We don't do that. So why do police officers get that? No.
Shifting gears back to the one and only Marjorie Taylor Greene and her absolutely bizarre comments. Here's a comment from Sahil Kapoor, who's a correspondent. DC resident here. It's quite pleasant tonight. I went for a walk around Sunset and the weather was beautiful. The outdoor restaurants and bars were buzzing and the streets looked calm. Didn't spot any riots or police. So why is Marjorie Taylor Greene trying to stir up this kind of agitation, if you will? Well, it's good for fundraising. Individuals like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz continue to raise a lot of money from small donors by creating more agitation, by creating more tribalism and creating more division. Because at the end of the day, what is good for business is agitation and creating more emotional problems, more emotional turbulence with followers, with the American people, amongst the voters. That is how politicians work. And speaking of agitation and the downright bizarre, Tucker Carlson from Fox News had what Aaron Ropar, who's a correspondent, calls a complete meltdown in response to a former New York City corrections officer who criticized Derek Chauvin for using excessive force on George Floyd. The interview ended abruptly. I want you to watch this segment, and this is absolutely bizarre, and let me know what you make of this. I actually think that since we've talked about, cuckoo people in this video, I want you to judge whether there's something wrong with Tucker Carlson in this clip. Let's roll the tape and check this out.
The scene. I just think that it was excessive, and it shouldn't happen. And what I'd like to say,
the guy who did it looks like he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So I'm kind of more worried about the rest of the country, which, thanks to police inaction, in case you haven't noticed, is like boarded up. So that's more my concern. But I appreciate you coming on, Ed Gavin. Thank you. Nope, done. Thank you.
And let's get back to Cori Bush, the congresswoman from Missouri, one more time. She said, this is accountability, but it's not yet justice. Strong comments from Cori Bush. Let's check out what the congresswoman said.
Verdict. This verdict is a step. It's a popping of the lock to be able to get to the place where we can open the door and really start to do the work to save lives. And so this egregious murder that happened, we can call it murder now, this egregious murder that happened, it should not be that it has to look like that in order for us to have some type of semblance of what people call justice. This was accountability, but it's not yet justice. Justice for us is saving lives.
And let me end this video with some strong comments from the President of the United States. This is what President Biden said. Such a verdict is almost much too rare. For so many people, it seems like it took a unique and extraordinary convergence of factors, including a murder that lasted almost 10 minutes in broad daylight. Gives me chills delivering some of this information. Let's hear from the President of the United States in this episode of Ignition Time, which I believe is the evolution of America, and I believe that we can call out to our better angels. Let's roll the tape and hear from President Biden.
Let's also be clear that such a verdict is also much too rare. For so many people, it seems like it took a unique and extraordinary convergence of factors. A brave young woman with a smartphone camera, a crowd that was traumatized witnesses, a murder that lasts almost 10 minutes in broad daylight for ultimately the whole world to see. Officers standing up and testifying against a fellow officer instead of just closing ranks, which should be commended. A jury who heard the evidence, carried out their civic duty in the midst of an extraordinary moment, under extraordinary pressure. For so many, it feels like it took all of that for the judicial system to deliver a just basic accountability. We saw how traumatic and exhausting just watching the trial was for so many people. Think about it, those of you who are listening. Think about how traumatic it was for you. You weren't there. You didn't know any of the people. But it was difficult, especially for the witnesses who had to relive that day. It's a trauma. On top of the fear so many people of color live with every day when they go to sleep at night and pray for the safety of themselves and their loved ones.
That's it, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about the evolution of America, both from a political standpoint as the Republicans gear up to combat the Democrats, and as crazy Republicans emerge who are trying to further divide us in an effort to further consolidate their positions with their voters who are on their side no matter what. I promise our viewers and subscribers that I'll bring you the truth, even if it makes some of our viewers and subscribers uncomfortable. I think we can grow when we tend to embrace that which is uncomfortable, and when we are bold enough, when we are open enough to challenge our own points of view. If you want your beliefs reinforced, if you want your Republican beliefs reinforced or your Democratic beliefs reinforced, you're not going to find it on this channel. What you're going to find on this channel is the truth, wherever the truth might lead us. Thank you so much for watching. Please click like, please subscribe, please enable notifications. I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.